So, you will know that over the last couple of weeks, I've been playing. I know it's going to be a shock. I've been playing NGS. I know. Just hold your applause to the end, if possible. It's not something that I've ever turned my eye to at all. We've had multiple conversations about this, and the reason for it being is it just seemed so far-fetched from what I'm used to. And this video, I just want to preface this by saying this video is probably going to be more positive for NGS than it is. There's a lot of negativity that I've seen in my limited time playing NGS.
Makes a change, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I don't get it. I mean, like, I think the biggest difference is, and we'll get into this, but I feel like people go into NGS expecting it to be PSO, and it's not. I don't know if you echo that or have any thoughts about that, but to me, immediately when I load up NGS, it's not Phantasy Star Online at all.
For me, I feel like there are some little elements that are carried over, like, I mean, you've still got some of the things like Dark Falls and things like that that are inherent to the series, but it does feel like almost like a completely different franchise.
Yeah, I kind of felt more, and this is probably going to be a sickening term to anyone that plays the game, but it definitely felt more MMO to me than anything else. I don't know, it just, I guess when you're so used to, I guess for a bit of background in case there's anyone new watching this, I predominantly started with Phantasy Star Online on the Dreamcast, so I'm used to kind of like the dungeon crawling kind of grind. I don't know, that was pretty much your first Phantasy Star from what I can remember as well. Not on the Dreamcast, of course, though.
Yeah, it was GameCube for me, but pretty much the same.
Yeah, so obviously we've had very, very similar pasts in that sort of sense. I spent less time online playing it on the Dreamcast than you perhaps would have done on the GameCube. But when you go into NGS, it's a very, very different landscape. You're not, stuck in that kind of, I guess linear is the wrong word to use, but you're not stuck in that kind of limited, procedurally generated arena. Stereotypically, you've got one standout room and then some other rooms tagged on, which you recycle the enemies through. And I guess in a way, it was kind of a breath of fresh air in a way, because I've also spent a little bit of time playing PSO2 Classic, which follows a similar formula to PSO, the original, but just it tries to expand on that a little bit more. And it was quite nice to jump into NGS and kind of look at the landscape around you and go, wow, I can just go wherever I want, realistically. Like, you'll know this more than I will, but it seems to me that they are regions spliced onto each other. And is there like a slight loading screen between like each region? I guess they're not already generated constantly all the time.
Yeah, so basically the first time you go to another region, you'll run over a bridge, and there's like, while you're running over the bridge, that's essentially like a hidden loading screen. Once you've done that, you can teleport between them freely, but you'll always have a little bit of a loading screen between each region. But each region, you can basically just run wherever you want to.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I've been noticing that you've kind of got these like white, transparent, like laser barriers that you sort of pass through, and then obviously it states at the top which section you're moving into. That was really, really interesting, because like predominantly the experience that I've had previously is you start on ship, so destination A, Pioneer, or the ship, Ark ship, wherever you're going, you pick a destination, you load into that, you drop down, you do what you need to do, and you come back out in a contained environment. Whereas obviously NGS is very, very different. It's, I don't want to hunt these monsters anymore, I want to pick apples from a tree, or I want to like go and feed a regional mag, or like climb the areas. And what was interesting to me is when I reference the MMO in NGS beforehand, what I mean is there's a lot of people that seem to just sort of hang out in certain locations of NGS.
For sure, yeah.
And I think I might be wrong in saying this, but I think NGS was more a project to build on this social status that PSO had brought to the gaming market and really expand that as much as it can. And I know there's a lot to be said. I know there's a huge negative side of NGS, which I'm trying to avoid. But I think if you want a game that is like, I don't know, you hop on with your mates and you just want to hang out and you're not that bothered about doing like high-end raids like in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14. I'm not saying there's not end game content in NGS, because I'm without a doubt there probably is, but I'm just not there yet. But it doesn't look like that sort of game that just forces you down that road. Like, you've got to find a dedicated static and you've got to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah, I mean, so there is definitely some in-game content, because the nature of the game, it does rotate and revolve quite a lot, but there is always some kind of in-game content going. I do feel though that NGS is a game that you can just like jump on for half an hour, do your daily quests, hang out with your friends for a little bit, and then log off.
Yeah,
it feels like it requires next to no time investment. I do feel like it's a game that does respect your time a lot.
Yeah. Which is ironic coming from base game PSO, which does not respect your time at all.
Yeah, PSO is like, how many years of your life do you want to give up for this?
Yeah. No, it's very, very true. I guess with that said, it's, for me, how is that coming from? And again, like, I'm only asking this question because I've had 10 to 15 hours in the game, but for a game that respects your time so much, do you feel like it doesn't urge you enough to want to log in and play it? Or do you feel like you're quite happy with the dynamic of, I just log in whenever I want, I can pick up whatever I need to do? I guess you get login rewards that I've seen as well. I wondered, like, it is nice not being forced into anything, but would it be nice to be more enticed to log in for certain things?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both for me. So for me personally, even though I'm an NGS creator, I probably play the game maybe twice a week, maybe. At the moment, I just don't feel there is enough incentive for me to want to log in every day.
Right.
I would like there to be a little bit more to do to incentivize me logging in and spending more time in the game. But I just don't feel like it's quite there yet. However, it is nice though, on the other hand, to have a game that I can just jump into when I want to. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I think, to an extent.
Yeah, no, I can understand that as well. I mean, I think we just got so used to, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but we've got so used to, especially in the online RPG and MMO space, we've got so used to having our time robbed of daily tasks and grinds, and you have to put this many hours into this to get to this. Like, me and you have tried to play Final Fantasy 14 fairly recently. I'm at endgame, you're right at the beginning, and virtually through MSQ lock, we pretty much can't do anything together. So I guess, if I, for example, in NGS, if I wanted to play with you, that could happen. We could just meet at a certain spot, providing we're on the same ship, if that's right, and then we just play together.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. The only sort of lockout factor for NGS is the battle power system. So there might be certain quests that you're not able to do until you've got a certain battle power. But there would be nothing stopping us from just meeting up and going out into the world and, hunting some of the enemies or farming stuff. So it is quite open in that regard.
That's quite cool, and it's interesting you should mention battle power as well, because that's probably my biggest, I wouldn't say negative at all, because I'm trying not to be that way at all, but I think for battle power is the first thing that struck me in the face as to, like, okay, this is a very different system, and B, there are a lot of, bearing in mind you've got a lot going on when you're a new player anyway, you're trying to work out the interface. If you've not played PSO2 Classic, there's a lot going on, like holy fucking menus, there's menus everywhere.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
There's pop-ups, there's login rewards, then you've got banners going up across the top of the screen, and then you've got urgent quests. Now, the urgent quests, the only thing that jarred me a little bit is I've travelled to a couple of urgent quests, not knowing as a new player that you can check in advance what the battle power requirements are, and I've not been able to do them. A lot of them are like, I think it's like a couple of thousand. I think it's like at least 2,500, 3,000 battle power. Which I know is like ridiculous. You'd think just check the menu right and you can see, but I think when you're in the heat of everything and you're trying to learn tutorials and grinding and creative space and all of this sort of stuff, your brain is just frazzled. So yeah, I kind of wondered, I'm at level, I think what am I now, 34, 35, something like that.
Okay.
So I'm not massively in, but I think I'm in enough to kind of get a brief understanding as to what's going on. How much does the battle power not necessarily get in the way, that's probably the wrong term to use, but is there an obstacle with battle power as you go along, or is it always something to do because you're always indefinitely reaching that requirement anyway?
So at the moment, my gear is by no means like endgame gear. There's loads of fixes that I haven't really bothered with yet because I just haven't invested the time into upgrading my gear enough. And I can do, I would say, probably 95% of the content in the game at max level. And max level takes no time to get to.
What is the level cap? Sorry to cut you off.
It is 90 at the moment, I think.
Okay, and that's likely to expand over expansions and updates, I guess.
They tend to update it by 5 levels every so often. So yeah, I believe it's level 90, the cap at the minute, and most of my characters are sort of mid 80s.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's nice to know that from what you've just said there, and I'm sorry if there's more to add to this, but you've obviously said you only log in a couple of times a week, which is super, super rare to find in like most online RPGs these days. I'm trying to avoid calling it an MMO because it's not really an MMO, but you know what I mean. I think people that are in these sort of spaces, they're like no life in the game to just try and keep up half the time.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that you can do pretty much 90 to 95% of all the content, and you're only logging in a couple of times a week. That is really, really like gracious, isn't it? If you think about it.
It is really generous, honestly. I mean, there is a quest that just launched recently, which is like it's a harder version of one of the bosses. It's maybe like almost like a challenge boss.
Right.
That has a really high battle power requirement, and I don't think I can do that yet. But I think that's about the only thing I can't do.
That's cool. At least, I suppose, from your point of view, it gives you something else to strive for if you want to.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, like you said, like we've already mentioned, I've got a Final Fantasy 14 background, and a lot of those higher end or higher battle power fights, just to quote NGS, they also require a lot of know-how, mechanics, routines, boss rotations, that sort of thing. Are a lot of the end game content, the end game missions, are they a lot of you just get to a certain battle power, then you can do it and it's just like a normal boss, or is there more to it in terms of like, oh, we need to learn this, and at this point he enrages or he does this, that and the other,
So I would say, honestly, this is one of my slight issues with NGS, is that I think once you've got enough battle power to do something, you will generally just steamroll most of the stuff in the game.
Yeah.
The exceptions are those, they're like special versions of some of the bosses that they add, where they're like 4 players only. I think you have quite a tight time limit for them, and you can only faint 5 times, I think, before the quest fails.
Oh wow, okay.
So they're quite hard because the bosses hit like trucks, and you have to know the patterns for the bosses quite well for those. But typically for things like urgent quests and so on, as long as you've got a half decent party, you're probably going to be fine. There isn't a whole lot of like strategy involved, honestly. It is just kind of DPS the hell out of everything.
So they are more just like almost like a daily activity, I guess. It's like a checkbox sort of thing.
More or less, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I'm going to assume from some of those quests, and again, I've not managed to do any yet, but you get some sort of like higher end material or something that you need to, I guess, collect X amount of, or they've got a chance for a rare drop of something, typical sort of PSO stuff.
Yeah, so you'll tend to find that at the moment, at the time of recording, the 11-star weapons are the highest in the game. And there is like a specific series of 11 stars that only drop from certain bosses, and like a very few of the quests. So you'll typically run those just for a chance of getting those 11 stars, but you will also get a load of materials and things like that as well. So there's always a reason to run them. Yeah. To be honest, most of the urgent quest bosses are actually quite fun to fight anywhere.
I must admit, from some of the ones that I've seen, I mean, we've whilst I've been streaming base PSO, we obviously, when we stream, we watch a few videos and watch a couple of boss fights and stuff. And from what I've seen, it's very creative, and I guess that kind of enthusiasm towards the boss design doesn't just stop there for me, because I must admit, when I first started playing NGS, one of the things that hooked me straight away was how the game looks in terms of its like the graphical fidelity of the game.
Okay.
Like, it's such a departure, even just from like the small jump from PSO2 Classic to NGS. It's like huge. Night and day. It's so big. I know, like, you could argue the toss that, all right, it's just particle effects and all this sort of stuff, but to create such an expansive world that you can traverse pretty much anywhere in with only a handful of loading screens, I think they've done really well in. I guess that was probably my first real takeaway from the game. The only thing that I had noted down, and I wrote it down on my notepad as soon as I noticed it, was like, if you've come from just playing base PSO, and when I say base PSO, I mean Blue Burst pretty much, the art style is so different. Like, it's just definitely. Like, honestly, you could title these games 2 different games And you wouldn't even put like the PSO comparison together, I don't think. I don't know if you think any differently to that.
I think there is some options with NGS. So there is actually a way that you can turn on cell shading for I think it's for your character, and if anyone else's character is cell shaded, it'll show their cell shaders as well. That helps a little bit to capture some of the aesthetic of some of the older games, but it's still so different otherwise. And it doesn't cell shade any of the areas, so it's kind of a weird halfway house.
Yeah.
It is a completely different game, sort of thematically and stylistically, I think.
Do you think that and again, I didn't struggle to run into players at all. Just before I say what I'm about to say, there was plenty of people when I used to load into the towns, regardless of what ship you're on. There's still people in there. People are like running about, but I'm wondering whether the drastic shift in gameplay rotation, art style, I wonder if that is the biggest factor that is potentially putting more people off of trying NGS and not just trying, because I feel like a lot of people try, but not many stay. Is that a fair statement? And you guys are probably going to be mad about that in the comments, but if it's not, then hopefully you kind of understand what I'm trying to say.
From what I've seen so far, my impression is that people who have played NGS for a while will probably stick with it. But to me, it seems like Sega have a problem of getting new players in and keeping them in.
Yeah.
The player base, I mean, I certainly don't think NGS is going to die off anytime soon, unlike almost everyone will tell you.
Yeah.
If you look on things like Steam charts, you can see that the player base has been fairly static for quite a while. So
yeah.
But it's also not growing.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, without, I guess, if you maintain a fairly flat player base, one set value throughout the whole time, that's great that you can maintain them, but it needs to go one step further, doesn't it? Ultimately, I feel like we've spoke about Clementine time and time again, which is obviously a private server, but they do a great job with keeping hold of the players that they've got, but they just do a really bad job with getting hold of newer players, and that might not be any fault of their own. It might just be that game was just a bit of a black horse for whatever it was, you know. But yeah, you are absolutely right. If the game isn't showing any signs of growing, there's obviously a reason why. I wonder at what point, and I was trying to ask myself this question whilst I was playing. I was like, I wonder at what point do people play the game and then get to that kind of switch off moment, you know, where they're like, I think I've had enough, which hasn't happened to me, because I really do feel like as long as you're in the mindset of this isn't Phantasy Star Online, it's still an amazing experience. But I wonder if people go into it thinking, cool, this is like PSO 3, I'm going to really enjoy this because it's PSO and I've played PSO for years. Go on.
The interesting thing about what you said there is, so obviously NGS is called Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, but I think that in itself is a bit of a problem, because then I think a lot of people inherently compare it to base game PSO2. Even between those two games, there's a lot of difference. I do kind of feel NGS should have been its own thing.
I think you're absolutely bang on from what you said. And again, like, I might not be in any position to say anything based on the fact that I've played NGS for maximum 15 hours so far, but I will continue to play it. But I think what you've said is absolutely bang on. If I didn't know any different outside of PSO2 Classic, I would assume that NGS was an expansion by its very nature. I do understand why they've done it, because I think if you went straight to PSO3, people are just going to completely jump ship from PSO2, even though PSO2 is a totally different game. But I guess it's a hard one, because you've got so many different plates to spin with so many different games. Like, although people love PSO2 Classic, you can't make it like PSO2 Classic, really, because why not just play PSO2 Classic? It doesn't make any sense to play, you know. There are things that I love about them being joint, and I find it amazing you can share a character through both games. You can share storage, from what I can see. Most of your salon choices and stuff go with you. I think there are different textures though in PSO2, and I think things are dumbed down a little bit. But yeah, I love the fact that, well, I do love to an extent, until you check your storage and realize you've got 110 items when you've just started a character in base PSO2. You're like, okay, this is fine. But yeah, I love that. I love that accessibility, that you can kind of jump in and out, because it makes you feel a bit more involved than just starting a new character and I've got to go through this journey again. But I don't really know how they combat that, to be honest. I don't really know what the best way forward is with, or what I would have done in terms of NGS, because it is a hard one. I do feel for them because I don't think PSO3 was the right way to go, but I also don't think tagging on as New Genesis. I remember watching videos of the trailer when it came out and I was like, oh my god, there's a PSO2 expansion, and it's like, oh, it's not, it's like a whole new game, and they're like, no, it's not an expansion, and then ironically when it came out there was like no content in it from what I could work out, but we're not going there. This is a positive video. I don't know, like, what would you have done as someone that's played it for a lot longer than me? Would you have separated it, done things slightly differently, or?
I think I would maybe have tried to market it as like a spin-off or something instead, possibly. It's a difficult one because I think marketing it as PSO2 New Genesis hasn't done the game any favors, honestly, because everyone is just comparing it to PSO2. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people who love PSO2 really, really love PSO2. Because NGS is not PSO2, they don't like it. It's a really difficult one, honestly. I do kind of feel with NGS that to me, I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way, but to me it kind of feels almost like a test bed for future projects rather than anything else.
Like almost like a what do they call it, like a sandbox mode, like a creative mode sort of thing, so you can kind of like test the waters.
It's almost like they were testing things out and experimenting with things maybe for a future game, but I don't know if that is the case or not, but that's kind of how it feels to me sometimes, particularly straight after launch when there was nothing to do.
Well, I think from what you've said there, it definitely resonates with me, because when I first started playing, the first thing that I noticed aside from the graphics is the movement. And in PSO2 Classic, that I've noticed right now, being a braver, we're using most of my weapon skills just getting about the map. So I guess they've kind of gone, well, this is ridiculous. Like, why use all of your PP just to traverse when we could just make you sprint or dash or jump or glide? And it does make perfect sense, but I kind of see where you're coming from, because I guess if they released it as a full separate game and the concepts of it don't work, then they'd be like, oh well, it just flopped and that was it. But I guess if NGS is attached to PSO2 and it doesn't work, then people just still load it up, but they just play PSO2 Classic. And I guess if you're on Steam and you've got it, I guess the player counts still show under one umbrella. So
I think they do, I think it's all treated as the same game.
I guess it's then hard to tell, NGS isn't a great game, but there's like hundreds of thousands of people online. I'm not saying it's not great, but that might be their opinion. So I guess maybe that kind of takes the buffer a little bit. I don't know. It might help with reviews and stuff like that as well. I could just be talking out my ass. But the movement was really different for me.
I think that's one thing I do really enjoy with NGS, honestly, just the traversal and getting around. It feels really, really fluid. I feel it's a big improvement from PSO2 for me. I personally, in PSO2 base, hated the sort of system where everyone had a fort on how to get around. If you're a braver, you used, I think, is it Guren Tessen, I think it is, to get around really fast. I hated that was the way it worked in PSO2, where everyone just used peers. I much prefer it in NGS now, where everyone just has really fluid movement. And I completely agree, but they've gone one step further as well, because as far as I'm aware, and you will probably quote me wrong, there are no mounts in NGS that I know of. Not that I can think of, no.
Okay, I think I've seen some people, like, maybe as part of a costume, they look like they're on top of something, but the only thing that I saw in the world, which I thought was really, really cool, were the little like poker chip discs that you pick up and like throw them, and it like teleports you. That's so wicked. I mean, once you actually work out what you're doing with it, because like to begin with, I was like, I'm just going to pick this up and throw it somewhere and see what happens. That's so cool. I think they've looked at that and gone, this is a pretty big map. Like, there's a lot to traverse. Like, yes, you can run really fast and you can glide, but there's a lot to cover here unless you're using like Ryuka devices to sort of travel about. But I love the fact they've put that in there, because if you still want to see elements of the world, which by the way, there are lots of hidden nooks, crannies, boxes, collectibles. There's loads of stuff going on that I didn't even think about. I just thought, I'll just follow the beaten path and go where I need to go until I'm pretty sure I messaged you actually and was like, I've just finished slaying like 50 golden chickens or something ridiculous like that. And you were like, that's a rare enemy. I'm like, oh, is it? Like, I had no idea. But I really love the fact that they've actually thought about the world, because I know it's a really terrible comparison, but I wouldn't want NGS to be like Starfield, where you've got this massive world, you've got so much possibility. I know it's different now. I know it's been updated, but when you load into that, there was so many different planets. They were all procedurally generated, and there was just nothing. Like, there was nothing you could do, nothing you could shoot, really. It was pointless. But NGS, to me anyway, didn't feel like that, especially from a new player, up from the prologue up to where I am now. I reckon every minute and a half, there's something to do. Easily. Probably even less than that, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. I feel like the maps are absolutely full of things. I mean, there's tons of little secrets on the maps as well. So there's certain areas on the map where you'll find it and it'll start playing music from one of the old games.
Wow.
So there's loads of little Easter eggs like that as well, which I think is really cool. That's
wicked. And that seems to be a common theme, though, because I've noticed, like, even, I mean, not to throw it too much back to PSO2 Classic, but even if you're just like AFKing in the lobby and you get like PSU music going on in the background, and in certain areas you get PSO music, and I feel like that's been a theme throughout most of the franchise, to be fair. But I didn't realise there were certain areas that did that in NGS as well, which is really cool. I feel like go on, go ahead.
Easy one if you want to check one out is you know the city in Retem.
Yeah.
If you jump up to the top of it, there's like a beam at the front of the city, and if you're at the end of the beam, it's like one of the highest points in Retem you can get to. It'll start playing the theme from Dagora City from MoreTube on PSU.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's wicked.
There's loads of things like that.
It's funny you should talk about Retem, actually. I know we've spoke about this a little bit, but and again, like, not negative at all, but one of my funniest new player experiences was discovering that in the story, not to spoil it too much for anyone who hasn't played it, something really bad happens. There is a certain enemy that you're trying to hunt down, and it's causing a lot of issue for the locals. People are injured. There's a camp set up. People are, trying to heal each other. And then you walk out of the door, and I'm just looking. I'm looking around. I'm thinking, where is all of this music coming from? Like, why am I in a cutscene where some woman is singing like Ariana Grande, just like in the middle of this desert? And also, why are there now so many people here? I physically couldn't understand it. And then until I looked up eventually amongst all the chaos and saw that there was a banner that said live concert. But I've come from this like dramatic, heart-wrenching moment where people are, their lives are being torn to shreds by this horrible monster. And then you've just got like this grand concert just going on in the background. It's like singing along. Yeah, no, it's so true. And everyone's like jumping around, like emoting and like bopping around everywhere. I just thought that was so odd, but like it had such a charm to it as well, because I just thought like only in an online RPG could something like that happen, because if it was offline, it's just structured. That's the story. That's where you go. This is the cutscene. But whereas like in an online RPG, it's just like, it's just chaos, mate. And then I feel like one thing I picked up really early, they're not afraid to sort of step outside the box with NGS. There's a certain character you meet, and one of her powers is the power of song, and she can sing and debilitate enemies. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, why am I smacking these enemies to death? If she can sing, surely just get a megaphone and then you're done. That's what I was thinking. I was like, surely this is where we're at. But so far, touch wood, I have not come across many characters that I don't like in the story. In fact, I don't know if there's any. Maybe like some of those guards in Retem, when you first meet him, you're like, you're a bit like not my cup of tea.
The casts.
Yeah, especially because one of them's like proper Giga Chad, like, oh no, you shouldn't trust them, and the other guy like come on, like, he's just killed all of them dolls, like, come on, cut him some slack. But no, so far, touch with the cast, as much as it is like super uber hyper anime, it seems really cool. I don't know if you perhaps feel the same. Maybe as you're later on in the game, you've probably got a different opinion.
I do genuinely like most of the characters. There is Have you been to Caveris yet? Or
I think I may well have just travelled there.
the Snowy region?
I have just travelled across a bridge, if that helps. I think I may well have just started that area, potentially.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but yeah, I may well have just started.
Well, I won't spoil too much, but there's a few characters you'll run into. There's one or two of those in particular that I find a little bit irritating, but to be honest, most of the cast in NGS I really don't mind.
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling. I'm glad you kind of said the same as me, because otherwise, if you'd have been like, no, I hate them all after spending too much time with them, I'd be like, oh, I'm questioning my decisions playing this now. There's, for me, I'm 50-50 with story, right? Like, sometimes I appreciate that it's there in a game and it serves a purpose, and I can get really hooked on it. Whereas there's other games where I'm just like, the gameplay loop itself, I love anyway. So if the story's there and I'm not that interested, I'll just skip over it. But I've tried not to do that, because anyone who's played any level of Phantasy Star, whether it be Phantasy Star Online or the what was it, the Mega Drive, was it Mega Drive games Phantasy Star was on originally? I can't remember actually now. Is it the Sega Mega Drive? I think it was. Was it a Master System?
Yeah, I think there might have been some Sega versions. I can't remember what consoles it started on now, but yeah, I think.
Yeah,
Mega Drive or Master System.
Either way, whatever console it was on before, if you played that, you'll know that the story, especially for example in Phantasy Star Online, like Blue Burst, as you're now going through on your channel, the story is amazing. If you want to dig deep enough to find out the intricacies and the history, the story is just unreal. And in a way, I kind of wish the newer games took that approach where it's not delivered to you so easily, you know, like this is a white piece of paper and it is white because it's white. Like, you know, I kind of wish it was a bit more like, oh, but by the way, if you went around the corner and went left and spoke to this, like, I don't know, this stone or whatever, then it would tell you, oh, like, this is what it's about. But yeah, I do appreciate that the story that we do have is, for me anyway, in NGS, it's far easier to understand that story than PSO2 Classic.
Oh yeah, definitely. PSO2 Classic is a nightmare.
My word. I am like, I was sat there earlier, no word of a lie. I was sat there this morning and I played for like 2 or 3 hours. I thought I'd just give it a good go. I'm just going to play the story. And then I'm like, the cutscenes are here, and then I'm talking to a dragon, and then I'm talking to a lizard who's worried about people that are following him, and then I've got someone who's blowing up a rock when she shouldn't be blowing up a rock, and then I'm like, oh, you've got a pink tie on and like a visor, who are you, where have you come from? And it's just like all these different, like, convoluted, I don't know if it probably makes sense, but it's just so much going on. It's like if you've ever been to an arcade, like when you first go to an arcade as a kid and you're just like looking around, you're like, oh my god, there's so much stuff here. You don't know where to go or what to look at first. That's what it feels like. But this is delivered to me in a much more manageable and sort of digestible term, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I mean, PSO2 story, honestly, even though I played through most of it, I wasn't around for the very end of it. But there is a point in the story that introduces time travel. And once it comes to that, it becomes almost impossible to follow. NGS's story, honestly, I feel is very, very simple to understand. I did have some issues with the early part of the story because I felt that there is quite a long time in NGS story where you feel like nothing really happens. It's very much very incremental changes. But the latest story chapter in particular, again, I won't spoil it for anyone that hasn't done it, but it does advance the story quite a bit, and there is quite a few new sort of revelations in it as well. So I do feel like the story is starting to improve quite drastically.
It's really, really nice that you also have that opinion as well. And I guess it's really hard for me to have an insight about something that I know nothing about. So this is probably quite an ambitious video anyway, which is why I wanted to get your perspective of it. But I'm glad you've kind of echoed what I said, because even where I am now in the story, I don't feel like lost. Yes, you're going to like a few different rooms, and it kind of explains to you the basic, like, especially when you first start, you know, this is where the weapons are, this is where you collect daily missions, blah blah blah, all this sort of stuff. But I think it also does a really good job of seamlessly transitioning you into, oh, this is like, I don't know his name now, but this is like the main captain of like arcs or whatever, and he'll look after you and send you on missions, and you go and see this person, and they've all got like different roles. I'm yet to kind of fully know the names, but I guess you'll get there eventually.
Oh yeah, sure.
But yeah, with PSO2 Classic, I mean, my God, I was like, you spawn in, and because I played on JP a little bit as well, I feel like I don't know whether it's just because I'd leveled a character before, but I've already had like multiple rewards thrown at me. I've got client orders hanging out of my ass. I've got like the Visi phones popping off because I've got about like 3 or 4 maintenance schedules, like the rewards to collect, and there's just too much. There's just like, you need a day to just get through all that before you can actually do anything else. One thing that, not to change the subject entirely, but whilst we're talking about the differences between PSO2 and NGS, not that that's what I wanted the video to be, but the photon arts for me are not just very different, but they function very differently as well. I've noticed that from what I can see, there are no direct, this is X level on this photon art. There's no, I don't know if they progress or change in that way, but obviously with PSO2 Classic and even PSU, when you're leveling them up as you go along, you're constantly striving and searching for that next strongest form of what you currently got. Whereas NGS, I don't know if it's done it, which I'm a fan of, by the way. I don't know if it's done it on purpose to allow you to just explore and just relax a bit more and not feel like, oh, I've not got a photon art for my weapon, so I'm just spamming X constantly until I find something.
Yeah, so there is a system it introduces later on called peer customization, which it does allow you to adjust how the photon art works slightly. So unfortunately, at the minute, a lot of them are just different variants of make this do more damage or make this hit a bigger area. That they're not that sort of ambitious, the changes to them at the moment. But there is some customization with the photon art, at least later on. Hopefully Sega expand a bit on it later on, but it's quite basic at the minute. I do kind of like it though that there's no leveling on the photon arts, because I hated that in PSU. I hated it in PSO2 as well.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think having the first game that I ever started with being Phantasy Star Online, I loved the simplicity of that game, which didn't seem simple at the time, but looking back on now, I love the idea of you get a weapon that you've been searching for a while, you can grind that up to a max of, I don't know, for example, if it was 30, that's your weapon, you swing it with either your light, your heavy, or your special, that's it. You've not got to worry about any other rotations on top of that. You've not got to worry about, oh, I'm not putting out optimal DPS because I haven't got Lunar Blossom level 12 or something ridiculous like that. So I completely get you. I like the accessibility, and that's why I asked you whether it was potentially putting people off in the older games because they've seen people that have got fully upgraded PAs, or they've seen people in PSU that have got the third evolution of whatever the photon are they're using, and they're not there yet, and they're like, well, this sucks, I'm using Rise and Strike level 3 and I'm not doing any damage. So I'm completely with you on that one. And one of the instant takeaways when playing PSO2 Classic, although you get your photon arts quite quickly, you are pretty much spawning in with a base weapon with, like, I think, do you even get one? You get one photon art when you first spawn into PSO2.
I can't remember, honestly. It's been so long since I started it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you do. And yeah, so the rest of your like hotbar is just filled with like generic normal attacks. So it was really nice to see that in NGS it was different, because I can imagine it's probably more so just focus on other things. There was so much more of the game to worry about than just leveling up your photon arts. And I don't know whether I'm right in saying this, but again, another takeaway from when I was playing it is I've not yet felt the need to stay in a certain area and grind a certain pack of mobs for experience. It doesn't seem like that right now will yield me a massive amount of experience unless they're relevant to the area that I'm questing through anyway. Especially, I know like early doors, the enemies are so underleveled anyway, you're not going to get anything. Yeah. But even where I'm at now, if I kill 10 to 15 enemies, it barely feels like it's even making a dent. But if I complete a daily quest and a main quest, I'll get like 2 levels.
Yeah.
So I think it rewards the exploration side of it more than the just generic PSO grind, if that makes sense.
To an extent. So you will find later on in the combat areas. Have you seen a PSE burst in a combat area yet?
Yeah, I think it was Mount Magnus. I've seen the first one.
So later on in the game, if you get those, you can get some ridiculous experience doing those, and that's often one of the fastest ways to level.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
But even saying that though, doing your daily quests and your weekly quests is still a really nice chunk of experience and decent money as well. So they're still really worth doing.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I guess from where I'm playing right now, and again, there's a lot for me that I'm trying to take in and trying to be as fair as possible about, because no one likes an opinion that doesn't have any weight to it if someone hasn't really played the game. So I'm trying to be a bit conservative with what I say. But it definitely seems like it's not worth my time right now to just, unless there's an event or some sort of quick time event or something going on, it doesn't seem worthwhile to just like, all right, that's the spot that I go to, that's where I grind. I guess if you want a certain weapon or if there's a certain drop, then maybe that's what you would do. But right now, it doesn't seem like that's the way to go. And I quite like that, because I think at least early on, there's the sense of, oh, I can just carry on with my trajectory to where I need to go, and I can just spend time just enjoying the world. There is, like I said before, there is a lot with NGS to enjoy. I didn't spend a massive amount of time in the creative mode because I just kind of like ticked it off. But I like the fact that they've added that in, because there's a lot of games right now that's the big thing, like player housing, creative spaces.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm sure there are some wacky creations that people have put together. You'll probably know more than I will.
Yeah, there's some ridiculous ones. I actually did a video on a few months back, because there was a contest that Sega ran for creative spaces.
Oh wow!
And someone actually made a district of Tokyo.
Oh my god!
And it was one I'd been through when I went to Japan, and I was like, yeah, this actually does look like it.
Holy. The talent, never underestimate the talent of people on the internet. It's insane. I love that so much. I used to play Fallout 76 when it first came out, and the construction and the ideas that people had were just nuts, the things that they could do. And that was quite limited, that game, to be fair. I absolutely love that. I love the way they've put that in there, because I think as well, like, a lot of people like to just build something they're proud of and just hang out there. I don't know how viable that is in NGS, but I think a lot of people like the idea of just, I'll log on because this is where I meet a lot of my friends and we'll just AFK. I do, obviously, that I guess the elephant in the room is that the one thing you do notice when you play NGS is there is a lot of like not suitable for work. Like, yeah, there is a lot, dude. Like, I'm pretty sure when I first spawned in, like, I'm not going to say anything crude because it's on YouTube, but there was like cleavage everywhere. Ridiculous. I'm talking like hot air balloon size. It's ridiculous. So I think
there's actually there's an accessory you can get that deliberately does that inflates the chest.
That's just nuts, dude. Like, do you realize how hard it is to take into an account a serious tutorial? And you're trying to speak to like an item techer, and all you can see is like you've just got this breast just here, like, and you're trying to just look forward, and you just can't see anything else. It's just a city of boobs, like, it's insane. And I was like, okay, like just get, it's not all going to be like this, but I can imagine, much like Final Fantasy 14, I can imagine there's some really seedy stuff. Like, I bet it's just, I bet the rabbit hole goes down and down and down.
I have no doubt about it.
In the interest of this not being a super long video, because I appreciate whenever we talk, we just go on for ages. I guess my thoughts and my wants from NGS, like, going forward, is like, for the story, I really hope they expand on some of the character developments, especially, I can't remember her name. It's like, I don't know if she's like the princess of Ratem or like the Queen of Ratem or something, but I really want her storyline to flesh out.
Nadara.
Yes, yeah, that's it. That rings a bell. So hopefully her storyline comes to light, because I feel like she's quite a key component. I could be completely wrong. The photon arts, I've not got any new ones as of yet for any of my weapons, but maybe I'm hoping that I'm not just stuck with the same photon arts for the same weapons all the way through. May well be. I don't know.
You are.
Yeah, I figured I can see the look in his face. It's like, it was at this moment he knew he fucked up. Okay, well, there you go. I guess you can't have everything, can you? But yeah, I wonder then how they're going to change it. If you don't, what was the decision behind that? Not to go like too crazy, but like obviously there's an abundance of photon arts with PSO2 Classic. Is it just that there was way too many and they've now gone, let's just keep it a bit more grounded?
That's kind of how I feel. I mean, for me, when I played PSO2 Classic, I found that there was a ton of photon arts that you just never used because there were better ones. I feel in NGS, I think it's good that they've reduced the amount of photon arts because I think most of them are usable. There are still some that just not worth it.
Yeah.
But I do kind of feel to an extent that they've maybe gone a bit too far in the other direction. I feel like we need maybe a couple more photon arts for each weapon.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what have I got access to? I've been using the wired lances. I've been using the double saber, and the sword is kind of like my go-to at the moment. Okay. The sword is my instant preference just because you've got that charge where you can kind of charge it up and just like spin into a pack of enemies and hit multiple. But what I will say on the photon arts, just before we like get towards the end of this, is that the photon arts that they've selected for each weapon definitely seem to serve a purpose. They're not just there for like, oh, we'll just put these in. Like I love with the wired lancers, you've got that grapple and you can just like drag yourself towards enemies and stuff and then like get some aerial attacks in. So it definitely seems they're in there for a reason rather than just be, oh, let's just pick 6 and they can just do whatever they want with them, you know?
Yeah. It does feel like each photon art definitely has a role where it's meant to be ideally used. So, you know, you seem to quite often have like an AoE PA for most weapons that'll take care of packs. You've got ones that are good for focusing on single targets. It does feel like a good balance generally. I just feel like we maybe need 1 or 2 more.
I completely agree, and that's coming from someone who's at the start of the game. So if I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I'm bored of my photon arts, but there is now very little excitement when I use them, if that makes sense. Like it's just like they're just there, like they're mapped to the same buttons the whole time. You kind of dash towards a pack of enemies, hold the charge, rinse and repeat sort of thing. But the nice thing is the pixels that you're looking at look really good, so it's kind of like it's a toss-up, right? One big difference that I must say that I'm a massive fan of, and it's probably going to sound really controversial, I love the photon blasts. I love them. I love the fact that the photon blast, from what I've seen, is attached to the weapon, as opposed to your mag, which I don't know if I'm wrong, but does a mag not exist in NGS? I know there's regional ones, but is it different?
So you do have a personal mag, but you basically all you use it for is playing music discs, and there's a couple of other little like menial functions it has. You don't use it for equipping gear or anything like that. It's almost unnecessary.
Which I'm, by the way, 50-50 on, because I do love the fact that being an original PSO and Blue Burst player, I love what a mag can bring in terms of power, which I get that they could just extract that power and put it into your character anyway. The bit that I'm completely for doing away with a mag is the feeding. I hate feeding mags. I've always thought it's a ridiculous system. I've always thought it's so easy to just mess up or have to follow a guide, and it just feels really like it's like going to work every 3.5 minutes. It's just basically it used to wind me up. I used to just think, oh, I'm just going to buy a level 200 mag and I'm just going to not feed it for the rest of its life. So
that's what I do now.
Yeah, exactly. And but I can imagine that's probably something that everyone does. So it was really nice to see that. But the photon blast, oh my god, the first time I used that sword photon blast, I was like, whoa. I'm pretty sure it was in a cocoon or something, the first training one that you do. Okay. And dude, I just decimated this thing. I was like, I'm looking, because obviously the graphics are on like maximum, and I'm just like here, just like holding back the screen. I'm like, oh my god, like there's so many particles. So it'd be cool to see how many versions of those there are. I guess there's one per weapon. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, so that there is one photon blast for every weapon in the game.
That's really cool. So I need to experiment. That's another thing I want to take away. I need to experiment with more photon blasts. The mag situation you've already covered, so I know that's probably not going to get any, but I need to understand the regional mags a bit more, because from what I can work out, I'm pretty sure, do they not just give you some sort of buff or something for the time in if you feed them a certain amount? And I guess that just affects you. It doesn't just affect the region you're in. I don't know. I could be wrong.
I think the way they work, so there's like a personal buff. So when you feed it items, it'll give you a buff. I think there's also like a region buff. So if enough people feed the mag, then everyone gets a buff or something.
That's cool.
I'm not 100% sure how it works, honestly, but it basically just for your region mags as another buff and another daily as well.
Well, I guess as much as I'm not a fan of feeding mags, I guess what they've done is, as most of the mags that I've seen that are regional are in quite picturesque locations. I think one of them's on top of a cliff that you have to kind of glide up to. So I guess they've gone, well, look, like, I know it sucks having to feed these things, but at least it's in like a really nice spot that you can hang out and take in the sort of area. So I really do appreciate that. But I was just kind of intrigued because like not seeing a mag in NGS, and the first time you see one, it's like 6 foot tall and floating. You're like, whoa, like this is massive. So yeah, I was kind of hoping to understand that system as it goes on. And I guess my only other takeaway, like from my experience being brand new, that I'm looking forward to is hopefully jumping into some of these urgent quests, because it'd be really cool to see how they play out and expand. I'm going to assume there's probably multiple takes on Dark Falls, and
yeah.
I mean, I've seen a couple of videos, but not loads. I've always loved that Dark Falls saga ever since it was introduced way back on the original Phantasy Stars. I love the fact that it's not just one boss, it's like an entity. It can shapeshift, and it can never be killed. It's always just suppressed. I really, really like that. But I guess my question to you is, after you've played for so long, is there anything that you would like to see added to the game, or anything that or anything that's in the game already that you would love to have seen perhaps beforehand?
So I think for me, the main thing I want to see Sega do with the game, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos, is that in the minute with NGS, there is a big reliance on what are called limited quests, which are these like limited time quests that they add every so often. They're usually fairly fun to run, but the problem is that NGS is very heavily focused on those at endgame. And because of that, a lot of the permanent content in the game almost feels like it gets a bit left by the wayside.
Right.
So you tend to find that there'll be certain things that you'll do in the game that once they're not like the new hot thing anymore, you'll just never touch them again. So an example of that would be, there was a new game mode they added a few months back called time extension quests, where you had to like essentially like time attacks. So you had to like beat waves of enemies within a time limit to get to the end of the quest. And they were populated for a couple of weeks, and then as soon as the next update hit, no one did them anymore.
Yeah, that's a shame.
So it's just a bit annoying that the permanent content in the game doesn't really have much focus on it. So I'd like to see Sega sort of take more notice of the content that is in the game all the time, because when you don't have a limited quest, it does kind of feel like, well, now what?
Yeah, what's next? You're always chasing that next thing, I guess.
So that's probably the main thing I'd want to see them change.
I think as well, we've obviously spoke about this before, but coming from base PSO, and I'm sorry to keep referencing it, but that's a big part of how we've grown up. Do excuse the cat just doing like gymnastics here. I think we've spoke about this in length before, where the static content that's in the older games, you're always striving for that best weapon, or the weapon that's got the most hit, or something that is always going to remain in the game and not become obsolete after another update. And I think you've said before, that's kind of what NGS might suffer from, is you could grind and grind and grind. I don't know how big the grind is, but you could grind for those items, those weapons, and then within a couple of months that gear set just becomes redundant. Well, maybe not redundant, but certainly worse off than what it was.
Yeah, there's this constant sort of advancement in NGS. So every so often they'll release whatever the new weapon series is, and you'll kind of just upgrade your gear to whatever that series is, and the gear that you were using kind of just becomes irrelevant.
Yeah. So
it kind of feels like it's almost not worth hunting anything, because it's going to be useless in a few months anyway.
Which is for a PSO player is quite heartbreaking, really. When I'm not saying that's all there is to do in the game, but when if you ever played the older PSO games, when someone says, "What are you hunting?" that's basically like, "What are we playing today?" It's that was the end game, really. You hunt for.
That is the game.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, outside of there are fantastic stories, as we've obviously said, but yeah, the game is hunting stuff, hunting weapons that you ironically, I'm probably never going to achieve because it's just ridiculous, you know. But no, it's really cool to get your insights, man. I mean, we've been recording for nearly an hour now, so I feel it's probably a good time to sort of wrap it up. But for me personally, I'd quite like this to be maybe part of not necessarily a series, but maybe something we catch up on a later date when I've played through it a little bit more. And you know, because things are obviously going to change, updates are going to roll out. Maybe even do something similar for classic PSO2 and just kind of run through it and chat, because it's always really good to get your perspective as well, because I'm not going to lie, you've spent way more time in these games than I have. As much as I've played a lot of Dreamcast PSO, that is a very small segment of the internet compared to what is available. But yeah, I guess unless there's anything parting on the game that I've missed for the time being that you just want to quickly cover, but other than that, mate, I'm happy to leave it there.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say in sort of closing is that I think if anyone is considering trying NGS, I would just say try not to be too clouded by a lot of the views that are going around on places like Reddit and YouTube, because there is honestly a ton of negativity about this game. Some of it is justified, for sure. But I would just say, if you are considering trying it, it's a free game. Just go and try it. Don't sort of let other people's opinions cloud your judgment on it, and just try it yourself. And if you like it, you like it.
I think that's incredibly well said, mate. And that's something that I've I guess fallen victim to as well, because as much as I made my own mind up about the game, that it's not something I would stereotypically play in terms of the art style and the combat. Yeah. And without being a massive boomer, I kind of like older games anyway. But I definitely let the negative reviews flood in, like the game was empty, it's heavily monetized, it's blah blah blah, all this sort of stuff, and I never actually bothered to load it up and play myself. So I was kind of in that same boat and a bit of a hypocrite, really. But yeah, I can completely agree with that. And for someone who is pretty much 15 hours in now, I feel like if I was going to give up, it would have been probably hour 3, hour 4. Maybe you kind of know when you don't like it, but definitely give it a shot. Go into it thinking that it's not PSO and you'll have a great time, as far as I'm concerned.